My stomach clenched into a fist when I found the seventh letter. Not from him, from a notary. It stated that my husband had died 3 months ago and left everything to his real family. The one I hadn't known existed for 11 years. But what frightened me even more was something else. The 6 previous letters were in the same stack, already opened, with notes in the margins in his handwriting. He knew I would find them. He had planned for it. And it all started with a morning cup of coffee and a couple of trivial questions I had dismissed without a second thought. Daniel and I met at a real estate conference in Chicago. I was 28, he was 41. He wore expensive watches and had a way of listening that made you feel like no one else in the world mattered. I had just gone through a divorce, changed jobs, and was looking for something solid to hold on to. Daniel became that. Something reliable, warm, grounded. 6 months later, he proposed. I said yes without hesitation. My girlfriends all said I'd gotten lucky. My mother said don't let this one go. Only my father stayed quiet, picked up his coffee mug, looked out the window and said nothing. I didn't think much of it at the time. Years later, I asked him why. He said, I watched the way he looked at you. Not like a person, like a piece of furniture he'd finally bought at the right price. We lived in a 3-story house in the suburbs of Atlanta. Daniel did consulting in the construction industry, traveled a lot, earned good money. I worked as an interior designer, took on clients, built a small portfolio, felt content. Mornings we drank coffee on the porch where the wisteria bloomed and scrolled through the news, him on his tablet, me on my phone. We talked about small things, what to buy, where to go in the summer, having the neighbors over for a barbecue. It was a quiet, even life. Almost perfect. So smooth that I never noticed I was slowly becoming a prop in someone else's play. Daniel was the kind of man who knew how to create a sense of order. There was a folder for every document, a shelf for every book, a slot for every thought. He handled the finances. Why fill your head with that, he'd say, whenever I asked about the tax returns. I didn't push. In the early years, it felt like care. He paid the bills, contributed to the retirement fund, tracked every expense in a spreadsheet meticulously, without a single error. I had a card with a limit that covered everything I needed. I never checked how much sat in the joint accounts. I had no reason to. Daniel had it all under control. There is one conversation I now remember with nauseating clarity. We were sitting on that same porch, somewhere in our 3rd year together. I had just landed a great project, a large country house, a client who gave me complete creative freedom and paid well. I was in high spirits, talking about wanting to open a small studio, hire an assistant, take things to the next level. A studio? Daniel repeated, not lifting his eyes from the tablet. That's a big upfront investment, isn't it? I could save up, I said. I did some rough math. Doable in 2 years. Why give yourself the headache? He said with that particular nonchalance I didn't yet recognize as control. You have everything you need. You work from home, flexible hours, no stress. You always said you valued that. I had said that. I went quiet, looked at the wisteria, at his bowed head, at the expensive watch on his wrist, and stayed quiet. The studio never happened. I convinced myself he was right, that peace mattered more than ambition, that I appreciated what I had. What I understand now is that he'd convinced me to stay small, manageable, contained within the limits he'd drawn himself. The first letter arrived 4 years ago. I spotted it by accident, sitting on the kitchen table on top of a stack of already opened junk mail. Daniel was in the shower. The return address said Nashville, the sender Patrick J. Coleman, notary. I picked up the envelope, glanced inside. Something about clarification of information and estate proceedings. I set it back down, planning to ask over breakfast. What's that letter from Nashville? I asked, spooning out the omelet. Work, he answered, not glancing up from his tablet. A client died. The family wants to sell a property. I handled it 3 years ago. Why a notary? That's just how estates work, he said, turning a page. Eat before it gets cold. I ate and I forgot. It's so easy to forget what you don't want to remember. The mind knows how to bury anxiety under layers of comfortable routine. But now I know. That was the first letter, and Daniel already knew that one day I'd find all 7. There's another moment worth going back to, one that seemed completely insignificant at the time, something I brushed off like a fly. About 6 months before the Nashville letter arrived, Daniel asked me to sign some documents for work, spreading papers across the kitchen table with the brisk efficiency of a man who has no time to spare. What is this? I asked, trying to read. Technical documents. Incorporation, paperwork for a business entity. Nothing that concerns you directly. I just need a second signature per the regulations. Why me? I have nothing to do with your company. It's a different structure for optimization purposes. I'll explain later. I don't have time right now. They have a call in 10 minutes. He was already dialing, already turning away. I signed 3 pages unread, put my name wherever he pointed, and went back to my own things. Looking back on that now, I want to walk into that kitchen and rip the pen from my own hand. But later never came. He never explained anything, and I never asked again. Life continued its smooth, quiet rhythm. And that smoothness was the most sophisticated trap he ever set. Our marriage ran on an even tempo and rare flashes of tenderness, which I had learned to value precisely because they were rare. Daniel wasn't a cruel man. He was very careful in everything. His words, his spending, his emotions, his gestures. When he kissed my temple, it felt like a checkbox ticked on a to-do list. Not cold, but not warm either. Just correct. I told myself that was maturity. I was 39 and had decided that passion was for the young, that reliability was what mattered. That summer he started traveling more often, always with an explanation, a return date, a brief call from the road. Everything's fine, I'm busy, I miss you. I didn't go through his phone, didn't track his location. I was the kind of wife who trusts and doesn't ask too many questions, out of respect, not naivety. Or so I thought. One evening while tidying his home office, a room he rarely let me touch, I noticed something strange. On the bottom shelf, behind folders labeled Taxes 2019, Taxes 2020, Insurance, there was one more folder, unlabeled, plain gray cardboard. I wouldn't have paid it any attention except for one thing. Daniel always labeled his folders. Every single one. A nameless folder was a blank spot on an otherwise perfect system. I reached for it and stopped, listening. The house was quiet. Daniel was asleep upstairs. I took the folder. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the desk and opened it. Inside were 7 envelopes, opened, edges neatly torn, each bearing a return address from the Coleman Notary office in Nashville. The oldest was dated 6 years ago, the most recent 3 months ago. All addressed to the same recipient, Daniel R. Marsh. My husband. I pulled the letters out and started reading. My hands went numb somewhere around the second letter, not trembling, just numb, as if I were holding the pages from behind thick glass. A low, steady ringing started in my ears. Not sharp, monotonous, like the hum of a device that's been shut off. The second letter was a reminder. The notary informed Daniel that the estate proceedings remained open and that his presence was required to complete the division of assets. The third letter contained an attachment, a copy of a death certificate for one Margaret Elizabeth Harris, 74, Nashville, Tennessee, with a note. As you are aware, the deceased was the mother of Carolyn Harris Marsh, your wife, and the grandmother of your children, Ethan and Sarah. I read that sentence 3 times, then once more, then set the page down and stared at the wall. Carolyn Harris Marsh. Marsh, our last name. Children. I had never heard those names in my life. Daniel had never mentioned children. He always said he wanted them, that the time would come, and somehow the time never came. I was already 42 and had long since stopped bringing it up. I said the names aloud into the silence of the office. My voice came out hoarse, unrecognizable. The fourth letter had a different tone, dry, official, with specific dollar figures. The estate consisted of a Nashville home valued at approximately $400,000, a brokerage account worth $180,000, and the deceased's personal effects. As legal son-in-law, Daniel had the right to claim a portion, provided that the marriage to Carolyn was legally confirmed. Legally confirmed? I ran my palm over my face. The skin was cold, though the room was warm. I opened the 5th letter. The notary asked directly. You previously indicated that your wife is unaware of the estate proceedings involving her mother. We must clarify. Has Carolyn been notified of Margaret's passing? Daniel had replied. I found a draft of his response paper-clipped to the letter, 3 lines in his precise handwriting. Carolyn is aware. She does not wish to participate in the division. Please conduct all negotiations through me. Carolyn is aware. His other wife knew. And his wife here, me, knew nothing. The 6th letter, dated 7 months ago, reported that Daniel R. Marsh himself had died on March 22 of a heart attack, and that he had been legally married to 2 women simultaneously, as established during the estate proceedings, that both families were being notified, and that his true wife, Carolyn Harris Marsh, whose marriage to Daniel had taken place in 1998, 12 years before ours, was the sole legal heir to all his assets, including our house, our accounts, our car. Our 11 years. The seventh letter sat on top. It was an official notification addressed to me, Alice J. Marsh, putative spouse, that our marriage was legally void, as at the time of its solemnization Daniel R. Marsh had already been lawfully married to another woman. That the house registered in his name would pass to Carolyn. That I had the right to file a claim for damages, but that the success of such a claim would depend on the specific circumstances. The date at the bottom. The notary had sent this letter 3 months ago. He was supposed to come to me. Instead it had come here, to Daniel's house, because he had made this address theirs. Even in death he had intercepted it. Even in death he had kept me under control. I don't remember how I ended up on the floor, back against the bookcase, holding all 7 letters fanned out like a deck of cards. I thought about that morning 4 years ago, the omelet, his offhand just work. About every business trip to Nashville I'd never questioned, about children named Ethan and Sarah, who perhaps knew nothing of my existence, just as I had known nothing of theirs. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it, showered until my skin turned red, then lay down beside my husband. My dead husband, 3 months in the ground, and no one had told me, because for everyone who knew the truth, I didn't exist. I couldn't sleep. I counted years, 11 years of that quiet, comfortable lie. Around 3 a.m. I got up, put the kettle on, and stood at the window looking at the wisteria, a gray shadow in the dark. 9 years of life poured into this house, into every detail, and none of it had ever been mine. The water boiled. I never made the tea. In the morning I called my best friend, Margot, practical, sharp, a financial consultant since college. Daniel died 3 months ago, I said when she picked up. I only found out yesterday. And also he had another wife and children. A long silence. Say that again, she said quietly. 7 letters, all documented. A notary, another family in Nashville. The house goes to her. Don't touch anything in that house. Nothing. I'll be there by 10. Have you called your father? I hadn't. I needed to say it aloud once first, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Margot arrived at 10:30 with 2 paper cups of coffee, and the expression of someone who'd already decided to act. She read all 7 letters slowly, methodically. I watched her face shift from weariness to quiet fury. All right, she said at last, folding the letters back into the folder. Here's what we do. First, you need an attorney who handles both family law and estate law, ideally one person. Second, we need to figure out what's in whose name. The house, the car, the accounts, what's his, what's yours, what's joint. Third, do not speak to the notary until you've spoken to a lawyer. Not a word. Margot, I interrupted. Do you understand that I was never his wife? 11 years I lived with a man whose wife I was not. She looked at me directly. Without the pity I wouldn't have been able to bear. You were his wife. You didn't know the truth. That makes you the wronged party, not the guilty one. There's a difference, and that's a difference a lawyer will turn into money. She paused. Have you thought about what Carolyn knew? I don't know. Maybe she knew. Maybe they'd been living apart for years. Maybe she thought they were divorced. I don't know anything. That's exactly what we need to find out, said Margot, opening her laptop. But before she could type a single search, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Tennessee area code. Margot and I looked at each other. I answered. Alice Marsh. The voice was male, official, no preamble. This is Patrick Coleman, notary office in Nashville. We sent you a letter 3 months ago. It didn't reach me, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. A brief pause. I see. Are you aware of the contents of the matter? Sufficiently aware. Then I'd recommend your attorney contact us directly. His voice softened slightly. Miss Marsh, I understand the situation is complicated. We're prepared to cooperate within the boundaries established by law. I hung up. The notary? Margot asked. The same one. Wanted to make sure I know, and to see whether I have a lawyer. You do now, she said, and opened her laptop again. The attorney through Margot was Victoria Lane, 45, specializing in family and estate law, a reputation for not losing cases she chose to take on. Her office was downtown, 18th floor, glass walls, no unnecessary furniture. She listened without interrupting, read all 7 letters, made notes on a legal pad. All right, she said, setting the pad down. Here's what we're working with. Your husband entered into a marriage with you in 2010 while already legally married to another woman. That is bigamy, a criminal offense in the state of Georgia. Your marriage is legally void. However, that does not mean you have no rights. She explained the doctrine. Because I had entered the marriage genuinely believing it to be valid, Georgia law recognized me as a putative spouse, entitled to an equitable share of assets accumulated during our cohabitation, provided I could document my financial contributions. The house is in his name only? She asked. Yes. He said it was simpler for tax purposes. Of course he did. She glanced up. Do you have any reason to believe the first wife knew about you? I don't know yet. One more thing, are you currently living in that house? Yes. Good. Don't leave. Continued occupancy is part of your position. The next several days I spent in a strange split state. Outwardly ordinary Alice, watering the wisteria, returning work calls. Inwardly a different woman, photographing every document in Daniel's office and forwarding it to Victoria. Bank statements going back 10 years. Real estate contracts for properties he'd never mentioned. A life insurance policy for nearly $1 million, beneficiary Carolyn Harris Marsh, of course. But the most devastating thing wasn't a document. It was a photograph in the bottom desk drawer, in a plain handwritten envelope. Daniel in a blooming garden, beside a blonde woman around 50 with composed features, a young man of about 20 who shared his jaw, and a laughing teenage girl, all holding hands. On the back, in pencil, Nashville, April 2018. That April I'd had pneumonia and a 101-degree fever, and he'd been on a business trip, sending me video messages wishing me a quick recovery. I photographed the photograph and put it back, not for the case, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes. On the fourth day, my neighbor Pamela came to the door, wearing the expression of someone with news she hasn't decided how to deliver. Hearing that Daniel had died, she hesitated. Can I tell you something? I should have said it sooner. 4 or 5 years back, she said, she'd seen him loading a suitcase into his car late at night, talking to a stranger by the gate about Nashville, about a house, about how it's more complicated than you think. And Daniel had said, Alice doesn't know and doesn't need to know. This is my business, not hers. I gripped the door frame to keep from swaying. Thank you, Pamela. I closed the door and stood there a long time. It had taken 4 years, 7 letters, and a conversation with my neighbor to finally hear those words. Now they played on a loop, his voice, his certainty, his careful, calibrated control over what I knew and what I didn't. Victoria called within 3 days. Good news and bad. Which first? Bad. The house is in his name only and will pass to the legal heir. The life insurance policy, same. Difficult to contest, though not impossible. A pause. The good news? I found 3 properties registered to an LLC, a shell company. You're listed as its director. Your signature is on file. A cold wave ran down my spine. I never signed anything related to an LLC. I suspected as much, forged most likely. That gives us leverage. These 3 properties are worth approximately $800,000 combined. A pause. There's more. Carolyn Harris Marsh lives in Nashville, works as a schoolteacher. She filed for divorce from him back in 2006, but it was never finalized. She may have thought they were already divorced, or chosen to look the other way. That's precisely why you need to speak with her. 2 weeks passed before that meeting, a separate, strange life. Work helped, especially one project, a Scandinavian minimalist office with a client who knew exactly what he wanted. Thinking about proportions and materials meant not thinking about Nashville. Evenings were harder. I'd sit on the porch where the wisteria bloomed and realize I was seeing it all through different eyes, like a stranger who knows she doesn't belong but hasn't left yet. One evening my mother called from Savannah. After small talk, her voice shifted. Alice, I have to tell you something. I should have said it sooner, but it was a feeling, not a fact. Do you remember our first visit to his house? I stepped into his office by accident and saw a framed photograph, a woman with 2 small children. I thought maybe relatives. Then he took the photo down. I never saw it again. But I remembered it. My mouth went dry. Mom, why didn't you say anything? Because you were happy. Because I was afraid of being wrong. Because, her voice cracked, I was a coward. It's okay, Mom, I said, and strangely it was the truth. Not because everything was okay, but because I had no energy left for anger. Everyone around me had seen something, noticed something, and said nothing. I had done the same. We had all stayed silent, each for our own reason, and Daniel had known it perfectly well. The meeting with Carolyn took place 2 weeks later, in a neutral conference room in Atlanta. She looked exactly like she had in the photograph, blonde, composed, tired gray eyes. She looked at me without hostility, with something closer to bitter recognition, as if she'd been expecting exactly me. Victoria outlined the legal context and asked both of us to remain composed. Carolyn, I began, I want to ask you one question, and I need an honest answer. Did you know he'd remarried? Carolyn didn't look away, but something in her face shifted, barely perceptibly. I knew he was with someone, she said at last. I didn't know he'd gotten married. We'd talked about divorce for years, but the papers were never signed. I thought, she paused, turned the ring on her finger. I thought it was his choice to live separately, that on paper we were still married but in life we weren't. I didn't think he'd actually go that far. I lived with him for 11 years, I said, not as an accusation, just a fact that needed to be spoken aloud. I believed I was his wife. I believed we had a future. I stopped. I'm sorry, she said. That's not for you. That's for him. And he's not here. No, Carolyn agreed. Disappearing right when he has to answer for something was always his specialty. Carolyn's attorney, an older man named Stanley with a precisely trimmed gray mustache, leaned toward his client and spoke quietly. She listened, nodded, then looked at me. You want the house, she said, not a question, a statement. I want what I'm owed, I replied. Compensation for 11 years. The house is part of that, but not all of it. Victoria spoke up, calmly laying out our position. The LLC with 3 properties, my directorship, the likely forged signature, the putative spouse doctrine, a potential claim against the estate. Stanley listened without interrupting. We'll need time, he said finally. Of course, Victoria agreed. We have matters that also won't wait. Walking out of the building, my phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. My name is Diana Forrest. I was your husband's accountant the last 8 years. She'd heard about the estate. Daniel asked me never to disclose certain details, but his requests no longer bind me now that he's gone. What details? An offshore account, Cayman Islands. I know the number and approximate balance. He instructed me never to mention it. I stayed quiet as long as I was obligated to. Now I'm not. She'd provided in writing on one condition: no mention of her name in public filings. Agreed, I said instantly. You were a shield, Alice, Margot said in the car. Not a wife. A shield, a tool, a piece of a scheme I had never asked to see, now seen very clearly. Then I need to become something else, I said. The handwriting analysis took 3 weeks. I worked, took on clients, made sketches, and it all felt like it was happening to a different Alice, one who didn't yet know about the letters. The real me existed in parallel, reading Georgia state statutes, studying the doctrine of the putative spouse with the thoroughness I'd once brought to design textbooks. At night I turned memories over. Every business trip to Nashville, every locked door call, his meticulous control over the finances. For 11 years I'd taken that for care. It had been an operation, long and deliberate, designed to keep 2 families separated so neither knew of the other, and both remained useful. At 3 o'clock one morning I called my father. Do you remember what you said about Daniel, that thing about furniture? He exhaled. They're not cruel, men like him. That would be simpler. They just see people as functions. You served a function for him. But you were never a person to him. I told him everything. Are you angry at him? He asked. Not anymore, I said. I want to understand what he did and why, and I want what I'm owed. It's not about him anymore. It's about me. That's exactly right, sweetheart. The results arrived 21 days later. Alice, the signature is forged, Victoria said. Confidence at 94%. That's a court-recognized expert opinion, and it means Daniel committed fraud. It means we have very strong grounds to recognize these properties as part of your rights as a putative spouse. Combined value $800,000, plus damages for the bigamy, plus a criminal complaint for forgery. It becomes considerably harder for Carolyn to simply walk in and take everything. She'd also found another offshore account, roughly $230,000, that no one had automatic rights to, more complex but workable. I texted Margot. Signature forged. Claims solid. She replied. I knew it. When's the next meeting with Victoria? Friday. I'll bring coffee, she wrote back. Friday, Victoria laid out the full strategy. A civil suit on multiple grounds, a criminal forgery complaint, a filing on the offshore account, and parallel settlement negotiations with Carolyn's attorney. She stands to lose the most from a prolonged fight, Victoria explained. If we open litigation on all fronts, the insurance and offshore accounts get frozen, the LLC properties get contested, years of stress and legal fees. They'll likely want to settle. The house stays with her, too hard to contest without a long trial. But one LLC property transfers to you outright, roughly $260,000, plus a cash settlement. We're asking $150,000. We'll land somewhere in between. Total roughly $400,000, plus your belongings. Is that fair? Victoria was quiet a moment. For 11 years? No. But it's what's achievable without a destructive legal war. The decision is yours. I thought for 48 hours, without consulting anyone, for the first time in a long while, letting myself decide alone. Sunday evening I wrote to Victoria. I accept the terms. Begin negotiations. Negotiations took a month. I lived in the house, kept working, made one trip to visit my father. Neither of us mentioned Daniel. As I was leaving, he walked me to the car. You never asked why I didn't say anything at the wedding, he said. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think it was my own selfishness, wanting to keep my daughter close. I thought better to stay near and wait than speak up and lose you. That was a mistake. You couldn't have known, I said. I could have, he shook his head. But I'm saying it now. You're going to be all right, not because I believe that, but because I can see it. You already are. I drove a few miles in silence, then let myself cry, the tears that had been waiting their turn for a long time. The settlement was signed in mid-November. The LLC property in Marietta, a 3-unit building valued at $275,000, was transferred into my name. The cash settlement came to $120,000, slightly less than Victoria had projected, but within range. The offshore account was divided equally between Carolyn and me by an international arbitrator, adding approximately $115,000 more. I spent my last night in the house alone, walking through every room, touching the walls, the bathroom tile I'd chosen, the couch we'd bought together, the porch with the wisteria. In the office, I took the folder with the 7 letters off the shelf one last time and left it centered on the desk for whoever came next. I didn't need anything else from that place. In the morning the movers took what was mine, books, equipment, clothes, a few paintings. The couch stayed. The kitchen table stayed. I didn't take a single photograph of us together, not out of hatred, simply because there was no reason. That version of me had disappeared the night I found the folder. The new apartment was small and temporary, 3rd floor, view of a park. I unpacked by evening, made coffee, and watched people walking dogs below. Margot called around 8. How are you? Strange. Quiet. Good, just unfamiliar. Did you eat anything real today? I'm 43 years old. That's why I'm asking. I laughed genuinely at the absurdity of it, and it brought me back to reality more than anything else had. Several months passed. I hired a management company for the Marietta house. The units rented steadily. My client base grew. I took on a few larger projects. I moved into a bigger apartment in a different neighborhood, a large kitchen, windows facing west, so that in the evenings there was a particular amber light. I bought a new coffee maker, small, simple, no unnecessary functions. In the mornings I made coffee, sat by the window, and read. Not the news the way I used to on that porch with him, but books. Thick, unhurried ones that required attention. A different life. Simpler. Quieter. Entirely mine. One February, Carolyn sent a message. Short, no preamble. Alice, I'd like to talk. Not about legal matters, just talk if you're open to it. I read it several times, then replied. Open to it. Where works for you? We met at a neutral cafe downtown. She'd come to Atlanta on business of her own. She looked a little more relaxed than she had in the conference room. I wanted to tell you one thing, she began when the coffee arrived. The kids know. I told them, not everything, but the main things, that their father had another family, another woman who didn't know the truth. She paused. Ethan was angry at first, at his father, not at you. Then he asked me to tell you he was sorry, that you didn't deserve this. He didn't have to do that, I said, looking down at my cup. It's not his responsibility. No, but he wanted to. She paused again. I also wanted to say, I didn't know about the wedding. That's the truth. But I knew he was living somewhere else, knew there was probably someone. I told myself it was my business. We were effectively separated, even if not on paper. I chose not to know the details. She looked at me. That's also a form of participation, I suppose. Choosing not to know. I said nothing. She was right, but I wasn't angry at her. She'd had her own version of hurt, for different reasons. Carolyn, I said at last, I don't want to spend time measuring who suffered more. There's no way to measure that. You lost a husband who lived a double life and never became the person he should have been to you. I lost 11 years that turned out to be built on a lie. We both lost in different ways, but we both did. She nodded. You handled this well, she said quietly. I heard through the attorneys you didn't break. I found a good therapist, she added. Sarah keeps telling me to get a cat. Ethan calls every weekend. It helps. We finished our coffee, said goodbye at the door, no embrace but no hostility either. Just two women connected by the same lie, now walking in opposite directions, each carrying her own piece of it. I walked back to the car through the February streets, her voice still in my ears. You didn't break. Oh, I did though. There was one night when it seemed like I might. Right there on the office floor with 7 letters fanned in my hands. But then morning came and coffee and the call to my father and Margot with her paper cups and Victoria with the folder on her lap. And gradually, one step at a time, I came back to myself. The one who is not a prop and not a shield. The one who knows how legal documents are structured, how forensic examiners analyze handwriting, what the inside of an arbitration building looks like. The one who no longer needs someone else to handle the finances. My father called that evening, as if he'd sensed something. How are you, sweetheart? Dad, I met with Carolyn today just to talk. How's she holding up? She's fine. Good kids, that's what matters. And you? I have a new apartment. 3 rental units in Marietta, and a very good contract designing an office in Midtown. I paused. And I have you. A long silence. You made it through, didn't you? I made it through, Dad. I knew it, he said simply. I always knew. I set my coffee mug on the windowsill and looked out at the evening park. The amber light from the window fell across the table, across a stack of papers with my work sketches, across a spare key to the Marietta house resting near the edge. Small, brass, slightly catching the light. New locks, new keys, a new address. I thought of that first cup of coffee on the wisteria porch, his hand on the tablet, his offhand just work. And realized I was remembering it now without pain. Just as a fact. Just as the opening of a long story that had ended here, at this window, in this amber light, with this key in my hand. The silence in the apartment was mine, and it was worth every one of those 11 years. Not because they weren't wasted, but because they were exactly what brought me here, to this light, this silence, this life that was finally only mine to choose.